Hello, hello. It is so wonderful to see all of you. Welcome to CitySpace. I am Margaret Lowe, the CEO of WBUR, and it is good to see a full house. Though I have to say, given the guest tonight, not one drop surprising. I have a photograph hanging outside my office a few floors up. It was taken by my colleague, Jesse Costa, who's one of BUR's brilliant photojournalists, in the fall of 2020. And he actually captured an impromptu memorial for Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. It was at the Harvard Law School Library just after she died at the age of 87, almost exactly 2 years ago. In the middle of the photo is a black and white picture of Justice Ginsburg. Her head is resting elegantly against a gloved hand, and the photo is surrounded by haiku testimonials written on yellow and pink and blue sticky notes, capturing the impact she had, not just on the country, but on individuals. You are the reason I wanted to go to law school, one sticky note said. Another, you are an inspiration to us all. When Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, the very first person I thought of was NPR legendary legal affairs correspondent Nina Totenberg. Nina and I worked together for decades at NPR, and Nina and Justice Ginsburg were dear friends long before their professional lives propelled them into the spotlight and Justice Ginsburg onto the High Court. That was the inspiration for Nina's book, My Dinners with Ruth, a memoir of the power of friendship. The book is not only an account of two women who paved the way for future generations, it is, as Washington Post Ruth Marcus describes it, a love song to the imperative of lasting friendships and an instruction manual on how to nurture them. I really love that. I'm so glad that Nina is here with us tonight, along with another extraordinary woman and journalist, my colleague, the incomparable Robin Young, co-host of Here and Now. So it is an honor and a privilege to introduce these two women who've spent a lifetime behind the mic, making our lives better and richer because they are doing the work that they do. Please welcome Robin Young and Nina Totenberg.
Hi, everybody. Nina, have a seat.
I own that dress, too. And I only own it because when I was here in May and I was interviewing Anita Hill here, she was wearing that dress, and I'd been ogling that dress for weeks.
By the way,
I said, Carolyn Herrera, and she said, yes, I'm amortizing it. So I decided I would amortize it, too. And so I did not wear it. Thank God, I would freeze my ass off in this city. I forgot how cold it is here.
Anything else you want to chat about before we do this? I want to say, first of all, it's really, really great to be in CitySpace. I haven't been around for a while. And we were having me come on Here and Now and do these segments about why I haven't been around for a while. And in-house, we refer to them as the I am not dead yet segments, because I just kept having catastrophe after catastrophe, and I was out again, ice, black ice on a sidewalk. Do I have to say more to a Boston crowd? No. And so I just had another shoulder surgery and just have come back. I know, but enough about me. That I just wanted to say it's just wonderful to see you all. So thank you all for being here.
In the flesh.
In the flesh. Yeah. And this book, how many have read it? Ooh, this is so exciting. Well, you're her sister. Her sister, Jill. Jill is here, and when you read the book, you'll see the role that she has played. This is such a wonderful book for more reasons than even the one I know that has brought many people here, which is your fabulous friendship with Ruth Bader Ginsburg. It is about female friendships. It's about your friendships with your sisters, with your NPR sisters, the late Cokie and Linda Wertheimer. It's really also a thrilling account of a life in journalism. We know Nina as the daughter of the renowned Brookline, violinist Roman Totenberg, but dropping out of BU, which I don't know how they feel about that.
I have a degree from BU.
Oh, honorary.
It's just not earned.
First job.
The truth hurts.
So much less expensive. But they have a climbing wall. So, first job at what would become the Boston Herald, then the Peabody Times, covering the New Hampshire presidential primaries. I'm going to skip ahead. You're at the National Observer. You wrote an article for the Observer about J. Edgar Hoover. I mean, just there, I'm thrilled.
He wasn't.
I know. He opens an FBI file on you after this profile that you did that he hated. You ultimately saw some pieces of paper. You couldn't take them, but copies of your your interview requests with him, and he had scribbled across one, "She certainly is a persistent bitch." Don't you love that? You want to frame that, right?
Yeah, but it was work product.
Yeah.
In legal lingo under the Freedom of Information Act, that is called internal work product, and I'm not entitled to it. I was entitled to some other stuff, but not that. And that was the thing I really would have loved to have had.
Hey, just, have someone move it into your home. Sorry. So sorry. Let's move on. He wrote the 1974 article, and I remember this for the New Times. This was a magazine about how the Supreme Court was the last plantation was the title of it, and it was how blacks in particular, who were court employees and messengers, were so mistreated on the court. Great reporting there. Then there was a 1991 coup, a reporting coup of yours that should have changed the course of history, and it was Nina who unearthed that it was law professor Anita Hill who was accusing Supreme Court nominee Clarence Thomas of sexual harassment. It's thrilling to read about all of those moments. And by the way, did you just meet Anita after all the phone conversations you had with her at that time? Did you just meet her here?
I just met her here. I had never met her in person before. I had talked to her on the phone several times and done a taped interview with her that was not all that different from her eventual testimony. But I had not ever met her.
That's amazing, of all those conversations, because at the time she wasn't sure that she wanted to give testimony. The hearings were going on. You said, we can't do this anonymously, this kind of a charge. You had the back and forths. We know what happened. The testimony played out. Oh my God, there's a scene. You and Senator Simpson debated whether or not she should have been put forward as a witness. I think it was on Nightline, and you talk about how you go to your car in the parking lot afterwards, and he follows you, and he's screaming at you that you have ruined Anita Hill's life. He's got his hand on your car door.
It's not my car, it's the car they sent.
The car, yeah.
The car door.
And there's a driver, and you get out and start fighting with him in the parking lot and call him an effing bully.
Yes, I did.
And you get back in the car, and the driver says, "You better get a gun."
Yes.
So this was thrilling, to read about the reporting, and it reminded me. Have you guys seen the YouTube video? I'm just going to get it and drop it on you, but there's a great YouTube video. Just go look. Just put Nina Totenberg elbows her way to front. It's a shot outside some government building, and there's this.
It's the Supreme Court.
Yeah, it was the Supreme Court. Okay.
It's the Supreme Court.
I had paid no attention to that, because what I watched is there's this scrum of, I think, all male reporters, and you see these elbows coming through, and then there's Nina with her microphone, like, "What's going on? What's going on?"
I don't know why, but for some reason, somebody saw this, I guess on TV, and just thought it was amazing that I would just walk up and put my microphone out.
You elbowed everybody out of the way. It was so great. It was great. And so I want to draw attention to all of that. It's all thrilling. But I also want to note, as we start here, that it is obviously, the title of it is Dinners with Ruth. And I want to say, first of all, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry too.
Yeah, but it was your
It's
friend.
2 years this week, pretty much.
Yeah.
The-
And we want to talk about that. But Dinners with Ruth is exactly the thing that when she passed, and you did that beautiful 9-minute remembrance on NPR, a lot of people got upset. Because while we've spoken before, Temple Israel and the New Hampshire primaries, we've done talks. You've spoken about this, you've written about it.
I always said that I was friends with her, and I was friends with Nino Scalia and
Scalia.
other justices as well. And I've always made that very clear, but some people seem to think that, and in Ruth's case, we were friends decades before she went on the court. So some people seem to think I should just divorce and drop a friend because she gets nominated to the Supreme Court of the United States. Not happening.
Well, but as you know, okay, but as you know, at the time, I'll just wrap this up. NPR posted a piece from the public editor, and it was titled, "NPR should have revealed Totenberg RBG friendship earlier." Do you think?
Every time I did a piece about her where I did an interview, I revealed it. So, I mean, you can't finish a story about today's argument in a regulatory case and say, oh, and by the way, I'm a friend of Justice Ginsburg's and Justice Breyer's and Justice Scalia's and many other members. I mean, you can't do that. And it's sort of silly. It's a sort of silly proposition. And it remains, I think, a silly proposition. I don't think you should hide your friendships. That's true. But especially if you cover somebody who you can't ask about their work, because if you did that, you wouldn't be their friends. You know, there are rules for judges, and they're generally followed by the judges.
Well, and just you talk about this throughout the book, that you did not talk to her about ongoing cases. You didn't ask her about gossip. You did. Have I got this right?
Yeah, I would have loved to have, but I knew that I just couldn't. That she would give me a stony stare, and that might very well be the end of our friendship. So you can't really do that.
And well, and conversely, she wouldn't say to you.
Oh, she once asked me not to ask her some questions after she'd said some very inadvisable things to say about then candidate Trump. And I just said to her, Ruth, I can't do that. You know I can't do that. I have to ask you that question.
This was towards the end when she was asked about Trump and she spoke disparagingly.
Well, it wasn't really towards the end. It was 2016.
Yeah.
And when he was running for president, and she made some comments that I, to this day, don't know why she made. It's not like I was under any illusions about what she thought about the election, but you can't talk to reporters and make comments like that, and it's actually a violation of what the normal rules of conduct are. And she eventually apologized for having said those things, although she never said that she didn't think those things were correct. She apologized for having said them. And then she didn't, I had a long scheduled interview with her that was like 2 days after she had apologized. And I always called her up ahead of time and said, let's talk about what we're going to talk about. And she said, please don't ask me about that. And I said, sorry, that's my job. I have to do that.
Yeah. So let's talk about her. And by the way, people out there, you can submit questions. Hold on. They're telling me on Slido, I think. Oh, yeah. You can submit questions at slido.com, #Totenberg. And so we'll take your questions as well over the course of the evening. So you hear a response. It might come up again, just the sense of Washington and how, you know, there's different kinds of socialization in Washington, D.C.
There really only two kinds of people in Washington, three kinds. There are lawyers, politicians, and policy people, and reporters. And that's, that's who lives in Washington.
I thought you were going to say people who give dinner parties and the few who don't. But we'll get to that. And so now you know why the Washington Post headlined their review. Nina Totenberg was friends with RBG. You got a problem with that? Talk about the first time you met. And for some of us, reading about a 50-year friendship with a woman, a friend over 50 years is so powerful. And yours started, she was a law professor at Rutgers. She was arguing a case.
She filed it was her first brief filed in the Supreme Court in what turned out to be the Supreme Court's landmark decision, first time in which it said that women were covered by the 14th Amendment guarantee to equal protection of the law. And I was a newbie covering the court in my 20s, and I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know you-know-what from Shinola, and I read this brief, and I'm puzzled by some of it, and I called her up, and I got an hour-long lecture answer. I was allowed to ask questions, but it was essentially a lecture. And it was the beginning of a first professional friendship, and then later a personal friendship.
Yeah, well, do you remember her voice? Do you remember that call?
I remember the essence of the call, but what I mainly remember is because I was like 20-something years old, and I did not know what I was doing, and her telephone number was on the front of the brief. And I called her up, and she answered the phone. She answered the phone, and she talked to me. And she always talked to me when I called to ask about her cases. She taught me many of the finer points of law that I claim to know now.
Well, and you didn't become fast friends right away, but you had this almost professional, collegial friendship as she made her way along her career and you along yours. But going back to, how you did things, you called people, you invited people to dinner long before Ruth Bader Ginsburg was invited to dinner. I think the first was Justice Powell.
Now, I have to tell you, I am 9 years old now, and I do not know how I had the nerve to do that.
I was just going to say, I've written here, I'm thinking what, doohickeys you had. You've got a tiny apartment, you're young, you don't have a lot of money to do a dinner party, and you invite a Supreme Court justice and his wife.
Well, he had been very nice to me, and I'd had lunch with him in his chambers, and more importantly, in some ways, his wife, Jo, was exceptionally nice to me and did not, she treated me like as they would say in Guys and Dolls, a poison. And so, but I have no idea whatever possessed me to think that I could ask a Supreme Court justice to dinner and he and his wife would accept, but they did. And I had this tiny little house that was 13 feet wide and had 2 tiny bedrooms, and it was, the ground floor was all one room. And I don't know who the other couple I invited were. I have no memory of that. But I do remember what I wore. And so I invited them, and you would have, I had this dinner party. I not entirely, I must have made some chicken thing. And they couldn't have been more lovely to me. And and I remained friends with the Powells until his death. And I still occasionally find a reason to talk to his oldest son, who I remember from the confirmation hearings.
Well, but it was Powell, Brennan, Sandra Day O'Connor, more recently Kavanaugh, all along Justice Scalia, in part because of his deep friendship with Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Now, you have said that the secret for making and keeping and nurturing friendships is the act of sitting down together for a meal. But you also say in the book, you wouldn't have invited maybe a senator. But it was different with the justices because the conversations were about educating yourself as a reporter.
Or they were about other things. They were about maybe what was in the newspaper that day, or they were about funny stories, or about books they'd written, or, Scalia was so funny because the one thing there were all these books about Scalia, for which he got not one penny. And he made it very clear he got not one penny. Even when they reprinted his opinions, he got not one penny. But he was, a lovely and charming human being. And that's, I think, and he made me laugh too. Ruth often said that when I or anybody else would say, you two are not, I once interviewed the two of them on stage together. And it's perhaps my favorite interview I ever did because they both were in a great mood. They came to play. They argued about stuff. They told stories about each other, very fond stories about each other. And I asked the perennial question, so how come you're such close friends? And she said, basically, he makes me laugh. And he said, what's not to love about Ruth, except, of course, her views?
Well, but here, it's kind of a variation on the first question. One of the listeners who wrote NPR when they were upset at finding out that you had this deep friendship with Ginsburg, this listener said to the public editor, I think both these women have the highest integrity. But it makes me, I'm surprised at what he called the social incestuousness in DC. How much more of this is there? And I remember one of the few times I lived in DC, I was so surprised. I went to a small party and I watched Newt Gingrich hug Ted Kennedy. And it was when there were these beginnings of these real fissures, Tea Party movement, and just this real animosity. And I got a little hurt. Like, wait a minute, you guys are friends, and you're.
Well, that's how you get stuff done.
I know, but to the rest of the country, there was this appearance of, well, it's the beginning of what we are living with now, which is this deep hatred. And somebody said to me today, along these lines, because we were talking about Scalia, and she said, what I want to know is, it's okay, you do what you want to do, but the rest of us out here are dying a little because we can't make friends for some reason. We can't seem to reach across this divide. And here I hear about these dinner parties. And
well, try harder.
Well, but really, there are people who wonder how that happened. And I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on Scalia and Ginsburg being so friendly. And they feel like, but the rest of the country, they feel in pain inflicted by some of the court's decisions, and
I understand
can't feel that. Yeah,
I completely understand that. But if we're going to survive as a society, we have to be able to accept the fact that some people have views that we find anathema. And that doesn't mean they're bad people. Now, I'm not talking about Adolf Hitler here. Mm-hmm. I'm talking about people who are, there are some people who have served on the court over the years who were really not nice or good people. But that has not generally been my experience. The court right now, I think, is very much not like any court I've ever covered. In addition to the fact that it's probably the most conservative court in, about 90 years, they don't really get along very well. And I say that not necessarily about just the liberals and the conservatives. The conservatives don't get along. And some of that may be that, we have almost a professional judiciary. We don't have political figures on the court anymore. We don't have people who do other things. And I I think that is not the most ideal situation.
Yeah. You talk in the book about what you think Ruth, as you would call her, would think about the court today.
I can't speak for what she would say. I mean, it's obvious what she would think about many of the court's opinions, but I don't know that she would. I'm pretty sure she would not think that the court should add justices, because I know that I asked her that in one of those hidden public interviews that was on NPR. I asked her about that about a year before she died, and she said she thought it was a very bad idea.
Yeah. Let's talk more about her. What was it with her and Scalia? Was it just opera? What was it that was the...
Oh, I think they were both big proceduralists in legal things. They had enormous respect for one another, and they also went at it. They had great, profound differences. But this was a genuine friendship.
Yeah, a love. Again, fast forwarding now, she's in the court. Your friendships have been cemented by movie nights with Ruth and her husband, your first husband, Floyd Haskell, a former senator, heartbreaking passing that she helped you through.
So did my other women friends and my sisters.
Right.
I mean, that's what, this book is not just about Ruth Ginsburg. It's just not. Simon & Schuster came up with the title, and I understand why. But and there's a lot about Ruth in it. But it's about the women of my generation, and we were very close because we came up at a time when there were so few women in the workforce. Almost every place I ever worked until NPR, I was either the only woman or one of two women. And so we were enormously close because we had to be. We weren't trying to break a glass ceiling. We were trying to get a foot in the door. And that is true for all of my women friends that you will read about in this book, along with some of the men who helped me in many ways professionally. And some of them were people that I suspect that the Boston audience would think are too conservative for their taste. Well, that's not the way I feel about them. They're interesting people, and they were very helpful to me at a time when it didn't help them to be helpful to me. And so I wanted to write about them too.
Yeah, and you did. I'm seeking, the journalistic questions to ask you. And now an audience question, which maybe I'm on the wrong path. Someone in the audience is asking, were there any comfort foods that you and Ruth revisited? And did you all, and your husband David is here, did you all prefer takeout or cooking yourselves?
Oh, come on. No, one of the things we shared were husbands who, my second husband, my forever husband, one hopes, who I now refer to because he's here tonight. And he's promised he would go with me on the book promotion tour because I really wasn't looking forward to it. So he has done that and much more. So I now refer to him as Prince, formerly known as David. And he's a fabulous cook. And Marty Ginsburg was a fabulous cook. Now, Ruth was a simply dreadful cook. And I am a pretty decent cook, but I don't enjoy it. And I have my basic things that I can make, and I don't go beyond that. But David and Marty were both adventurous, interesting cooks. And so they often, when they would come to us, Marty would bring his baguette and some dessert. And when we would go to them, David would bring something else. And after Marty died, increasingly, and especially after COVID hit, Ruth would come to dinner at our house because it was the only place that she could be really safe, and David was her medical confidant. And we put all the leaves in the table, and we would sit at one end, and she would sit at the other with her daughter or granddaughter or whomever happened to be there. If they were there, they all were tested before they came. And her favorite was, and her comfort food, I really do believe, was bouillabaisse. And David is a wonderful maker of bouillabaisse. So, in fact, at some point, I have an Instagram account now. At some point, I'm going to put David's recipe for bouillabaisse, which is a take on Julia Child's. It's somewhat different. And I'll put it on Instagram. Or to be more precise, my niece will put it on Instagram.
Well, I just want to note that David was a surgeon and a terrific cook, and I asked you when we were talking earlier, does he rent out? Because what he has done and what you talk about in the book to support you and Ruth was amazing, and towards the true end. As you say, he was the medical advisor to Ruth, worked with her doctors, and did not tell you.
No, never told me.
That was private.
I mean, when somebody comes to your house every week, every Saturday for about, I think it was 23 or 24 weeks, you can see the fade when it's happening. So you don't have to be told. But, David is a great friend to many people. He's a wonderful doctor and not just a surgeon. As he often says about some kinds of surgeons, let's put it that way. Mm-hmm. Some kinds of surgeons, if you see a doctor walking down the hall with a stethoscope, he's not an orthopedic surgeon.
Well, I'm just grateful that he was there with you on your honeymoon, as would be
Yeah.
when you got run over by a boat when
Yeah.
you were snorkeling and got torn apart, and he was in the water with you and got you out of the water to a hospital and sewn up. And so, do you rent out? It's just incredible. Talking again about dinner and about the current court, another audience member, asks, I mentioned Kavanaugh came to the wider party that you and your husband have, and the interns.
He's come to dinner at our house too.
Yeah. Which of the current conservatives on the court would you invite for dinner now? And Kavanaugh's come.
I refuse to answer on the grounds that it might tend to incriminate me, but I would invite some of them. I'm not sure they'd all come. That of course is the thing. But I've known Brett Kavanaugh since before he was a judge on the U.S. Court of Appeals. I knew him when he was a law clerk, for Christ's sake. I like Brett, and I love his wife Ashley, and I think that while I personally don't agree with some of his opinions, that's not my job. My job is not to agree or disagree with any individual member of the court. And I enjoy his company, and I enjoy her company. And I think that, I would not recommend that people treat Kavanaugh the way they have. I think it's impolite, rude, and guaranteed to foul the waters of discourse in this country if we can't get beyond the fact that we dislike intensely the way somebody was confirmed, the opinions that he or she has, and we. Call me old-fashioned, but if we can't do something beyond that, then we're never going to get to a place where we can accommodate each other at all. And I don't want another civil war in this country.
Yeah. Ruth, Did you ever talk to her about retiring? We know that President Obama kind of hinted you should. Everyone knows.
Yeah, I didn't know. I didn't know that Obama had.
Yeah, we know
I
it
mean,
now.
that came out after she
Yeah.
died,
Right.
and the New York Times broke the story. I did not, and I didn't know it. You know, Ruth was remarkably forthright about things like that. And I asked her about it in public multiple times, and she was quite clear always. I mean, you know, there's some things that you can infer, but she, at the time that she had that lunch with Obama, you have to remember she was at the top of her game. She was the senior member, I suppose, liberal on the court at that point. So she was assigning opinions some of the time. And she was having a very, I think, good time professionally. And the filibuster existed was in full swing at the time. And I think that she never said this, but I think that she thought that nobody could be confirmed who she thought would be anywhere near as good as she was because of the filibuster. And she obviously, I think, believed that, as many people did, that Hillary Clinton would become president. And she wanted to give the first woman president the chance to replace her. That last part, those last 2 points, I've just inferred from watching her and how she answered questions. But you know, she gambled and she lost.
You mentioned the disagreement over what to say about Trump. That stands out. But one of our audience members asks, was there ever a position on which you and she disagreed? Now, you write about how you've had these, it's almost, salon-like conversations with people, but did she ever talk about a position she was taking that you also talked to her about and maybe wanted her to take a different position? It doesn't sound like that's,
No.
I don't see that in the book.
No, I mean, you know, you have discussions with people after the fact, but my view is that Ruth, I think, was probably considerably more liberal than I am. But she was a true New York intellectual, and I'm much more in the mushy middle. And so I can't think of any, there were a couple of times that she wrote opinions that surprised me. There was a case involving a kid who I think refused to be drug tested, and therefore was barred from from extracurricular activities. I think I'm remembering this right. And I think that she either wrote the opinion or agreed with the opinion that the school was within its rights to do that, that extracurricular activities were different, and that the kid was, I think, the implication here is that didn't want to do what was required of him at school. Mm-hmm. This is not somebody who, I may be conjoining a couple of cases, but it was the first of those cases. And I was quite surprised that she would view that, but then I remembered that Jane Ginsburg, her daughter, used to disclose to me once that her mother used to, who was always trying to keep her from eating too much and eating badly, her mother would look in the wastebasket in her room to see if there were candy wrappers there. So I don't think the Ginsburg household believed that kids had a huge number of rights. That does not mean they don't have political rights and all of those kinds of things. But so there were times when she took positions that surprised me anyway. And, but that's true of every member of the court that I've covered. I can't say that they're not that predictable. I'd say they're more predictable now than in the past, but that doesn't mean they're always predictable. I mean, you wouldn't think that Neil Gorsuch is a great defender of Native American rights, but he is. And so, every time you think you know something about somebody, just remember that you might be wrong.
Yeah. By the way, you said Ruth, and I'm being way too familiar, I know that, but aren't we all? We call her Ruth. That she didn't want the court to expand. One of our attendees asks, what do you think?
I think that she was right in her position in the sense that if the public believes that every time they don't like a major opinion, and they're going to be adding members of the court, pretty soon you'll have a court that's bigger than the courtroom. But even so, the main point that she made was that if you want people to believe at all that the members of the court decide things for reasons other than partisan politics, then you can't be adding members because you don't like what they did. I can't offer a solution to the current court situation because we can see from the the polling data that the court has lost enormous amounts of public confidence. It was, in 2020, it was the public confidence in the court approval was about 66%. It's now, at the most, 40%. So it's lost a lot of the coin of the realm. And you can't be sure that it won't get it back. But the court, when it has succeeded, has generally not gone too far in one direction or another. And if it's going to do that, it will lose the coin of the realm. And then I don't know what we do for a judiciary and an ultimate decider of conflicts.
It's interesting. I was going to say that in the little green room before this, I was privileged to hear you talking out loud about the court and this notion that it can't get too far ahead or be too far behind people. And your sense was that it's a little off balance right now. And I asked you something that somebody here wants to know, what your opinion was, informed opinion, but we don't know, about the leaking of the preliminary Roe v. Wade decision.
I thought it was awful. I mean, I know of no time in which a full opinion, draft opinion of the court has been leaked. I know of no other case like that. Yes, there have been little leaks here and there that, so-and-so changed his mind, or there's a little, but nothing like this. It's probably the only time in my life that I've been scooped and glad that I didn't get the scoop. Because I would have, I'm sure, felt that once I had ascertained that the opinion was accurate, that it wasn't a fake, I would have felt that I had to tell people about it. That's my job. And I think it was very damaging to the court, very damaging to the institution, and bad for relations among the justices. And I think it's most of us who cover the court now are, I don't think we're likely to find out who did it. And that's true of most leaks. And then I also think that most of us who cover the court think it's pretty obvious that the leak was by somebody on the conservative side. That's not necessarily it's not a member of the court. That's not a law clerk. Hundreds of people have access to these computers and opinions. And it was somebody who was afraid, I think, that one of the members of the conservative majority would not stick and would go join Chief Justice Roberts in a more limited opinion. And I think that the leak did exactly what it intended. It meant that nobody flaked off. The chief was by himself. And they all hate each other as a result. I think. You know, I think it's really been bad for the court.
Get back to Ruth in a second, but it occurs. Were you also friends with Sotomayor or Kagan? I mean, the fact
Yes,
that you're...
I know both of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just...
And I've had them both for dinner.
There you go. There you go. What do you miss most? It was a profound... I don't care if she was a Supreme Court justice and you're a star of NPR, you know, political reporting, Supreme Court reporting. In any book, it was a profound, beautiful friendship.
I just miss her. You know, she was a darling friend and a darling woman. She was not the easiest person to talk to, even for me on occasion, because she was very quiet, very restrained, very shy. But she was a performer. You know, you put her on a stage and people paid attention because she was a performer. I just miss her. I miss her warmth and her sweetness and her brain. I mean, you can't imagine. I mean, I saw her a week before she died and she was very frail, but it's not, maybe even less than a week. But her brain was still working 100%. She was still correcting me in my account of stories where she knew the details better than I did.
Yeah. Well, I have to say, Nina Totenberg, I have never heard anything but a dispassionate rendering of your reportage, to the extent that sometimes I get annoyed at you because it's like, wait, is that good or bad? Like I couldn't follow it, you know, because you never, do you agree? I feel like I never hear an inflection. I never hear anything that would betray some kind of partisanship or some kind of knowledge beforehand of something. One of our guests tonight wants to know, especially with, you know, you've been through some losses. Mm-hmm. A husband, two best friends, mm-hmm. Cokie.
Ruth died a year after, almost to the day that Cokie died.
Yeah. Sometimes that makes us, you know, like a fall on black ice, get up and say, I want to do this because I'm here and I can for them. Is there something that you want to do?
Well, no, I like what I do. I don't want to be a columnist. I don't want to be I really don't want to be an influencer. God, I hate that word. I mean, there are people who think that's an occupation, and it is being an influencer. But, you know, I wonder how long they're going to have any influence. I just sort of plug along and hope that I can keep doing it for a while. Somebody said to me that, was this my swan song? No. they Simon & Schuster offered me a great deal of money to write this book. And the CEO, this was his idea, was to frame a memoir in terms of friendships. And I thought that was at least a doable idea. And I still wasn't going to do it. But Prince here talked me into it. And Prince David talked me into it. And spent, as I say in the dedication, all of the late nights apologizing to me for it. But this is my first book, and it's my last. It's really hard to write a book, even with some help. It's really hard to write a book and keep your day job. And if I write another book, nobody will want to read it because it'll be a cozy mystery, and I will have just retired, and I'll have to find something to do.
Yeah. Well, we're glad you did write this one. It is a terrific read. And whatever you do, please don't go. Was it snorkeling? Don't.
I go snorkeling.
What? Oh, with the boat running you over.
Yeah, I know, but I go snorkeling. I'm very careful. I'm very, very careful, and I never go snorkeling. Not that I did go snorkeling alone, but I never go snorkeling alone. I go with a flotilla. You know, my family goes to Jamaica at Christmas time, and so it's a huge. It's David's family. It's my family. It's a lot of Totenbergs. And I swim. I go far. I go, a third of a mile or a half a mile, and then back. And my sisters, who are faster swimmers than I, they are the army. David will go with me if he feels like it, but they are the army, and they have children, and the children they're the captains, the children are the lieutenants, and there's just every time I look up, there's someone within my eyesight. So.
Okay, one very last question. What advice would you give young journalists who want to cover the Supreme Court with nuance and depth, given today's highly polarized political environment? And would you tell younger reporters, I have a nephew who's just started at the New York Times, he's been there for a little while, White House correspondent. Would you say dinner party? I'm serious.
I don't know. Because it is different.
Yeah.
I mean, it is different covering politicians than it is covering the Supreme Court. And, I have only one really great friend who's in politics, and that's Pat Leahy. And that's because I've known him so long. And in fact, my husband knew him when he was a medical student. When David, was a medical student, and Pat was the state's attorney. So I, again, that friendship goes back a long way for both of us. But I certainly knew, I was married to a United States senator. I knew senators, but I didn't invite them for dinner. And I think it's because there are no lines. There are no clear lines about what you can say and what you can't say. And so
So what advice would you give?
I am still a firm believer in trying to see both sides and trying to be fair. Now, that's gotten more difficult in the political world because I never thought I would reach the point where I was saying of the President of the United States something he said was not borne out by the facts or a lie. And I mean, that was just not what you did in journalism. But you didn't have to worry about it because politicians were afraid to tell flat out lies. And now they're not so afraid of that anymore. And that's a very difficult thing to deal with.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a tough thing to come up with an answer to. But so much else is in here. I would say if you have young loved one who's going to be a journalist. And if you want to read about, as many
Hopefully
of us
this
do.
book will make you laugh a lot.
Oh, there's that.
And it will
too.
make you cry.
It will.
Will make you cry at moments,
will.
but it'll make you laugh too.
Nina Totenberg, thank you.
Thank you for having me. Okay.
So perhaps the only thing better than dinner with Ruth is an evening with Nina Totenberg. Nina, Robin, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much to all of you for coming out tonight. It's really wonderful to see you all and to have you here. Nina's got to dash off, so she's not going to be able to sign books. She has another engagement, but there are lots and lots of books in the lobby. So stick around a while, get a book, talk to new friends and old, and have a wonderful evening. Thank you again.